Hey, Gale Force, this is Seth Greenwood, writer and creator of the Gale comic, coming at you from Florida. And I'm joined here with Angela. And say hi, Angela.
Hi everyone, my name's Angela. I'm the artist behind Gale, and I'm coming at you from Toronto, Canada.
And this is Musings. This is our second episode. This is kind of like a podcast where we share our process and casual conversation to let you, the audience, know just, what the heck it is we're up to. So, how you been doing, Angela?
Not bad. I'm a little bit out of it today. As we kind of talked about earlier, it's kind of been one of those humid, lazy days, and so if we sound more sluggish than usual, then apologies for that.
I was actually sleeping when you called me, so
yeah, I saw that. I caught the end of that.
I was trying to turn off my video really, really, really fast, but it didn't happen in time. So, yeah.
But today,
anyway.
today we have a special guest with us, and I'm really excited. We are joined by Jordan Kirian, who is a comic creator of Hotcakes Comics, and he also letters for Gale. Say hi, Jordan.
Hello.
Do you want to just say where you're from?
Sure. I am from Marysville, Ohio, which is in the central Ohio area, kind of close to Columbus.
Okay, cool. And surprisingly, we're all in the same time zone, so that worked out really well.
That was weird. I sent you guys the thing that I said in Ohio time, and then you were like, we're on the same time zone. I was like, oh, how do time zones work? I don't know.
Yeah. All right. So, Seth, do you want to kind of, maybe what we can...
I just want to kind of catch up on, last time when we were talking about Patreon and the changeover and everything like that. So, maybe I know last time we talked about switching over to a monthly pledge or maybe changing or adding some tiers and things like that. So that's kind of what where I wanted to start at.
Yeah, so last time we kind of talked about just briefly how, our current Patreon model is a very confusing pay-per-creation model. And so we set that up that every time we finish a Gale page, like when it's finished in terms of rendering and lettering, that's when I guess we charge, and that's what the patrons contribute to. And so we talked about just kind of simplifying it and making it clear for both us and also for our patrons to kind of just charge monthly. And it was interesting because before this, Jordan, we were kind of talking to you because you also run a Patreon for Hotcakes, and you also had the weird pay per creation thing, and you switched to monthly. And do you want to just quickly share your experience with that?
Sure. So, when I set up my Patreon, I was really confused because it had those two options. And when you guys were talking about it, I was thinking back on it, and I feel like Patreon was kind of hey, you don't want to do this by creation option. Because I remember thinking, why did they offer that? Because it was so confusing to walk through. And so I switched to monthly because I was gonna try to do a pretty regular schedule. So I think that works out if you're gonna have more content, and I do think that the people who are on your Patreon are going to be a little bit more prepared to, pay X amount per month, knowing that ahead of time, rather than if I'm gonna be charged once or twice or three times or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's just so that, they kind of, it's more like they, there's these times where it's we'll put out content, but we might not necessarily put out a page. And it's sometimes, we don't charge Patreons, and then all of a sudden we do. And sometimes we charge twice when we put out 2 pages. And so it's, I think getting your perspective on that and kind of confirming what we felt was really confusing. It really, truly is. And so Seth, you and I were kind of talking about okay, how are we going to do this? I honestly have no idea how to do it or when, but I'm suggesting maybe we can try to kind of switch it over, by August.
Yeah.
And maybe just to kind of make it fair for our current patrons who's been on this wonderfully confusing system, what we're thinking of doing is like, because I want to keep pushing out like what we talked about, at least like the 2 pages. I want to keep doing our weekly podcasts, but we're just only going to just put one of those pages, we're just going to charge for one of those pages, and instead of like what we usually do, so that it's kind of like a transition when we actually kind of switch over the system. So,
Right, and so like it's not really changing at all too much, except for it's more predictability about how much money you have going out and how much money we have coming in, and really it's not going to change too much in my opinion. We're going to actually have more content though, and that's what I think is going to be great. It's like there's more predictability. We say we did 4 pages, but it would still be more predictable about what was coming out of your bank account, right? So we did 4 pages. It's not paid by creation. However, we're still having like the podcast, the blogs, and the same kind of content and more. And then you're switching to that monthly method, and I think it's better for everybody, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, and also like one of the reasons why we also want to do it is obviously to grow our Patreon account as well. And I don't think we're like really I guess advertising it as much as we did in the beginning. And so hopefully by switching to the monthly model, it's just going to make it a lot clearer for potential people who might want to support us in the future. They don't have to kind of go through this like full page blurb of like reading about like how our Patreon works. So yeah, and Jordan, I also like wanted to ask you as well, and we were talking about this briefly before, just kind of crowdfunding for comics in general, and I saw that on Instagram you were trying out this new platform. I believe it's pronounced Coffee, and if you wanted to kind of share your experience with that.
Yeah, sure. So I learned about this maybe like 2 months ago, like right before I started. I just kind of like jumped right into it. The primary difference between Coffee and Patreon is that Coffee is like you can basically decide that's like a one-time payment. Patreon's a monthly thing. Coffee, you just kind of stop by. I kind of look at it as like a tip jar, whereas Patreon is like kind of a monthly, you're going to get that monthly money. The nice thing about Coffee is you can just drop by and give $3 whenever you got the money, because a lot of times with Patreon, and especially, I don't know about you guys, but a lot of people in my age range, in the late 20s, they're like, I can't commit to a monthly thing. So it is nice. The big drawback to Coffee is I don't think anybody knows what it is yet because it's so new. So I put that up there, and I haven't got a lot of feedback. It's a nice idea, but I think that people are confused because I think they're just getting used to really what Patreon is.
Yeah.
Right. But I think everybody needs a tip jar, right? I mean, even if you have like your monthly supporters, somebody might stumble along and they might find your coffee or something like that. And they, like if they're not the kind of person that wants to commit to monthly, every business, if you go to it, that has a service has a tip jar. So like to have a digital like tip jar, that's kind of cool.
Well, I will say it was kind of nice because I did have to do some some self-promotion for it. So I kind of put some feelers out there like, hey, I am on this platform. And when I kind of reminded people, it gave me a surge that day of quite a nice little bit of support. So I think if you kind of slip that out there every now and then, people are more, because there are a lot of people that weren't on my Patreon that went to the Coffee and they slipped me, somebody did like $20 and then somebody did like 15, so it ended up being close to $50, and it was really nice.
Oh, nice.
I know. Oh yeah, and see, so like, isn't that nice when that happens? Because I had a guy that I used to work with when I was actually back in Korea, and he was huge into comics, like before I even started writing comics. So when I came back and he was off doing his own thing, and we were kind of disconnected for a while, but still kind of connected on social media. I think he saw that I was actually doing a comic, and he was like really into it. And then when we had a Patreon, he like came out and like he gave us so much on Patreon and like per month. And I was like, hey, this is how the Patreon works, right? And he was like, yeah, I know. And I was like, oh, okay. Because I was like thinking that maybe you're giving a little bit too much for creation.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he was like so willing to do it. And he was like, I'm just going to do it for as long as I can. And I'm not going to cancel my, I'm not going to cancel it, but I'll just adjust it at the end. And, it's really cool that he was, willing to do that. And it very much so surprised me.
Yeah, and we're I know exactly who you're talking about, and I'm just gonna say like that person is going to get like all our stuff for free in print for life. I just really appreciate that. Like, wow, I was just like not expecting that at all. But yeah, Jordan, could you just like so on like coffee, I liked what you said about just kind of slipping it in there every once in a while, like as kind of a tip jar. So do you like? I guess my question to you is like, do you also update the site as well? Like, do you post content onto that onto coffee, and does coffee itself have like a discovery system within it?
Yeah. So yeah, I update the page every now and then, because since it's not like monthly service, it doesn't feel like pressure to upkeep as much, and you're not giving exclusives away necessarily, because with Patreon it's like, oh, like look at my behind the scenes stuff that nobody else is going to see because you're paying for it. With coffee it's more like, I do have stuff you can look at. If you like what you see, you can kind of put money in there, and then here's my link to the stuff to my website. So I haven't updated it for a while because I just got busy with I'm putting together I have a convention that I run, and so I'm putting together some books for it. So like all my attention's going towards that. So I'm like, okay, I got to do this and this, and so eventually I'll get to coffee. But yeah, you do put stuff up there, but it's not as exclusive. And then the way that it works is it's kind of hard. It's not as I don't think it's as well. I haven't looked around as much, but I don't think it's as good as in terms of exploration as Patreon, because I've looked around on the site, and maybe there's just like not that many people. Like I always run into finding like the same 5 people doing comics and stuff, so I try to support them. But then it's I don't know if maybe just because it's so new, and again with the way things change so quickly. By the time I'm saying this to you, it could have changed already. Right. But it is a little hard to explore it. For me, it was anyway. But I'm not as savvy on certain platforms as others. But
and like I guess like maybe this is a good time to just kind of transition over to something that I guess we want to talk about, is just kind of different platforms that are out there for promoting web comics, or just comics in general. One of them, like I guess one of the big ones out there is Webtoons, right, which is specifically built for web comics, and it has a system where you can link it directly to your Patreon. And yeah,
right. So we started on Webtoons, and I think the reason I think you're the one that first mentioned Webtoons to me, because I had no clue what it was. And I think when we started on it, it was actually really big in what was it, South Korea, and then it's been growing ever since, and now there's like a Webtoons like all over, and the Webtoons in the United States is just coming out with all kinds of awesome comics, and the cool thing that I love about Webtoons is they have their I guess their comics, they're like their branded comics, they're comics that that they want to that they kind of help people, and they kind of pay people, and then you can actually use Patreon, and they actually contribute to your Patreon. But then they do have this discovery system as well, and so we started on that discovery system in hopes that maybe one day, and this was very early on in Gale, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of started hoping that, nobody knew us. So what I wanted to do was, I wanted to have everybody access Gale, because if nobody thinks, what you're doing is more important than what you do, especially if they don't even know who you are. So you have to make people believe in what you're doing. So really, you just have to put everything out there. And I know it seems like counterintuitive, but I think it's actually helped us. I don't know. What would you say, Angela?
Well, I think putting content out for free, it does seem counterproductive, because it's like, well, you kind of want to, do good work and get paid for it eventually, right? So that you can keep doing it. Is particularly like the way that we're kind of creating Gale and how we re-envision it. It's a very time-consuming process, and that you love it, but it does take up a significant amount of time to kind of create the kind of comic that we want to create. But so it's kind of like, I think it's to me it's kind of like the internet content marketing strategy, where I'm sure like Jordan, we've all kind of been there, where it's like, nobody knows who you are. So you have to kind of put yourself out there on the internet, and you have to kind of show your work, right? In hopes of kind of that's how you kind of grow your audience as like an indie creator. And last week I talked about Jason Brubaker, who, he's been doing webcomics since just like, way like probably like, I don't know, since like 2006. Like, it just seems like forever. And he's used that, kind of utilized that strategy, where he kind of blogged about his graphic novel, and he'd put up all the pages for free, and then he'd probably remaster, edit the pages, and then sell like print copies. And so I guess it's hard doing that, because I guess what's happened is everyone can do that, because it's so like the bar of entry is so like low. It's free. You can just like post your comic on Instagram. You could post your comic on Webtoons. There's really nothing stopping you. And so it's I still think it's necessary to do, I think, as indie creators. But I'm wondering, like,
especially when you're starting out. But I think one of the problems that I had with it, that we started running into, is like, we had this this small following, and they were very supportive, and they were looking, for content each week, and if not every day,
yeah.
And so, and that's exactly what I was getting to. It's like, you would have the commenters that were like, "We'll always be here. We'll wait for you," and then you had the people that were like, "We really like your comic, but dang, we would like to see you do it like a post every day," and people don't have. That it's this consumer thing, they consume one thing and they want it, really fast. It's kind of like the Netflix, we're like the Netflix generation, right? Where we can just binge watch everything, and like, we don't have to wait. And, people don't realize what actually goes on in making, one page of Gale versus what goes on in making, one page of, something else that, and it's, it's crazy, because there are a lot of comics that are on Webtoons, and they come out each week, and but this is people's full-time job, and especially like with Lifelight and my dear cold-blooded king, our MDCBK, she comes out with it every week, but she was able to make a plan to get all this stuff done. And I know her life was hard for like a long time before she got to quit her job. But about the time that we discovered her, which was very early on in, when she actually first got discovered and first got like kind of mainstreamed by Webtoons, she was actually, I was having a conversation with her, and she said that she was actually able to quit her job now and, go full time into Webtoons. And that's exactly what she did. So now most of these people that are putting this content out that's not on Discover anymore, they can come out weekly, and it's okay, and then in the Discover, the people that come out every day, it's just like, it's just a different type of art, and, it's not on like, that, same scale as like what, we're trying to do with Gale. So it was kind of hard to keep up with. We couldn't post every day. And it was actually becoming really hard to post every week. And then we started slowing down and slowing down and slowing down. And that's one of the reasons it didn't really work for us because, well, for one, you could put it back to like we were hungry, but we planned poorly for the releases. And at the same time, it was just in general, it would have been hard to keep up with because, we would have been having to work like constantly, and it would have been like a full-time job to keep Webtoons up.
Yeah, and I also think like when we launched Webtoons, it did really well when we uploaded the first issue because the first issue was basically done, right? So it was just about kind of adapting it to the Webtoon format, but around the same time we also launched Patreon. And when you kind of set up a Patreon, and I don't know if like you remember, Jordan, but I think when you first kind of set up any sort of platform, it's always a lot of work. You have to kind of fill it with content and just kind of figure things out. So like at that time, I was like, drawing new pages, adapting them for like Webtoons, because like chapter 1 was done except for I think a couple of pages at the end. So I was kind of doing that and running like Patreon and like posting stuff on there, as well as and when we first started Patreon, I don't know if you remember, Seth, but we were offering like I guess one of our ideas as like a tier is as a tier prize is to like to kind of create like backgrounds, like just custom backgrounds like every month, for like the higher tiers, because like everybody loved like the Gale backgrounds, and I like doing backgrounds, and maybe I can do that. So I was trying to keep up with like all these things, and then we had, and that was the time also when What the Water Gave Me came about as well. And so and like you said, Seth, I think we were like hungry, and we kind of like, I don't know, maybe our eyes were bigger than like our appetite, or like we kind of bit off more than we can chew, and so it just kind of collapsed from there. And I think if I were to do it differently, I would just like probably create a buffer. And I always make this mistake, is like not creating like enough of a buffer. But with that said, I think we are like, so chapter 2 is like almost done. I'm just working on like maybe the last like dozen pages, and I think once that is done, what we're planning to do is just release the rest of it like on Webtoon, so that people can read it. And I just really feel bad also for abandoning the community on there, because I love the commenters, because they actually got the story and you were having conversations about the story, as opposed to like on Instagram, where people mostly kind of just look at the picture and and not really, because it's not like a great Instagram's not a great format to really get into like the story, except like Jordan, like yours work because like Gordy works because it's like you release it as like a strip comic, and that works on Instagram. But I think Gale does, it doesn't work as well, because it's like this kind of like long series that needs to be read in a book.
So what I have noticed is the scroll thing is actually really cool with Gordy, because what I'll do is I'll take a little bit more time to scroll through and actually read the comic, and it's because I've gotten into it, and then I scroll through and I remember these strips, but at the same time, like some strips can be related, some strips can be different, but like what I've noticed is that, if I read one and then I discover another when I'm scrolling through, and then I scroll over and read it, I'm like, oh wow, so a lot of these are actually building on. And I find that that's really cool, because I'm keeping up with it, and the whole scroll thing works for you, because you have and I'm so glad that Instagram has that, because you can post several pictures up at one time, several panels, and you can scroll through the panels. And I like most of the time it's like 3 or 4 panels.
Yeah.
And I really like that, because I'll tell you what it is. A lot of people, and I'm guilty of this too, will scroll through and they'll see a pretty picture, but you know, Instagram is like ADHD, like
Yeah.
crack.
Yeah.
So like people are just really just scrolling through, like, oh, I like that, double tap. Oh, I like that, double tap. But like they're not taking time. But like when you have to go to something and you kind of like you read it for the first time, right? And it gets you hooked, and it's like, oh, I want to see this next time. So like Gordy, I read the first one, and I just really like it because it spoke to me because I seen you in it, and I know we were talking before we started recording, and I know Angela and I were speaking last week, and about how we had met, and never really met in person, and we felt like we've known each other forever, and we kind of said the same thing, me and you, and it's like, so when I saw Gordy, I know like how you are with ducks, like
Yeah.
how you and you're a cartoonist by nature, so. I really find your jokes, I get your humor. So it connected with me. And so when I read that first strip, I was hooked. So every time I see a Gordy comic when I'm scrolling through, then I'll just stop for a second and I'll scroll through, and it gets me to slow down.
Wow, I really appreciate that. That's an amazing thing to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
The thing, and it's great because Instagram, I don't know when they started. I think it was like a couple years ago they started doing that. And the reason that it is so adaptable with that is, it's because it's going to be like a short joke. And what I like about it the most is when now keep in mind, I've read comics for the most of my life, but even to this day, if I'm reading like a strip like that, my eye like jumps to the end. So my favorite thing about the Instagram thing is like you can't ruin the joke for yourself.
Yes, that is so true, because you have to scroll to the next page, and it's like flipping through a book with one panel on it.
Yeah, it's really nice, and it stops people from, it does get people to read it, and it gets them to come back, and it's such a great a format. But but for the long term stuff, I don't think it works because like your guys' story is so much more nuanced.
Yes.
Than mine, and I think longer too. So it does have its challenges.
Yeah, and what I love about Gordy too is that it gives me it reminds me of like the old like 90s newspaper comics, right? And I think it's so perfect for that Instagram format because the joke is contained in that slide, right? So it's like, so you get like this sample, the story and the art and like the joke, and you're writing like this like nice little sampling all at once, and it's great. And I like what I love about webtoons is that I love what they did, like the scroll format. I think they did a great job with like the app, and they've made like webcomics really easy to read. Because I don't know if you guys read much webcomics, but back in the day, I think like people would just post like the comic pages online, and then and you had to kind of click on like a link to go to like the next page. It wasn't kind of user friendly. It was kind of a clunky way before, I guess, webtoons figured out a more user friendly way. And particularly like now you can kind of just get it on your phone, and that's what I love about it. But I guess it's just more of just keeping up with like the demand is a little daunting.
Well, I was gonna say while you guys were talking, the thing that I don't know if I've noticed this, but I kind of have this philosophy that audiences are so like we create these things because they're stories that we want to tell. They're part of us, and I think that there's this sort of philosophy that I uphold that once you do the work, the audience will find you. And I think that the people that are going to stick with you are the ones that they don't care about. They're not going to put a huge demand on you and say like, hey, because the people that are doing that are there's people who are really going to like your work, and then there are people going to like your work, but they're not going to be the ones that support you the whole way. And I think that you guys finding your pace, the people that are going to stick with you are going to be there the whole way. And then once you do get that pace, you're going to find new people that are going to be there. So it's always like you have to work at your own pace, because at some point you have to say, I am the creator here. And I'm going to have to make a stance that, like, my pages are going to be done whenever they're done, and people are either going to accept that or they're not. And the people that aren't going to accept that are people that you don't even need to worry about, because like Seth said, we're in this culture of like now. I don't want the base to be like that, because then my work is going to suffer. So I think as long as you guys are staying true to your story, your fan base is going to stick with you, and then it's going to grow when you get to where you're meant to be.
Yeah, I wish we could get Lifelight on here, because I know she has had a bunch of comics for, for her webcomic, and she's also been on Twitter saying the same thing. Like, I don't understand, like, how people can't, how people can't like sympathize with the fact that it takes a long time to come up with this stuff. I mean, she's been doing this. She's been, coming up with a story in her head for years, and then when she goes down and she just, commits to the art, like, she's doing a really good job of, I mean, everything's perfect by the time she puts it up. It's just, but everybody wants it more and more and more, and like they just want it faster. And but then she does have her fans, like you were talking about. Me and Angela and I spoke. We hate the word fans. That's why we use Gale Force. but anyway, I'm saying fans because that's what a lot of people actually associate with, followers and things like that follow it like kind of like religiously, and they wait for it every week. So her fan base kind of looks for that every week, and she has those dedicated people that are just looking for it every week, and that will be there, that are just reassuring her, like, you know what, it's okay, who cares what these people say. They're just people that, they're not in it, they don't care about the creator. They're, they read a story, and for some reason they just, I don't know, I'm trying right now so hard to get into the mindset of being that, that kind of person, like,
it's interesting, because I think it can be such a dehumanizing experience, right? Like, when I was kind of like trying to pound out those pages, like, I think it was the beginning of 2017, where it was like I was trying to like do webtoons every week. I didn't have a buffer, so I was just drawing a page a week and like posting up on webtoons, and like I had like no life. I was working like every second of the day and like it was and also just, and it just kind of felt like I don't know, after a while I just felt like, why am I doing this? I'm actually not really enjoying it. And I don't think I've ever talked about this, but I think that period where I was like doing that and then switching to like doing What the Water Gave Me, which I finished I think in like 2 or 3 weeks, like all of it in like 2 or 3 weeks, like coloring, lettering, and like all that. I was like really not happy in a sense, because I just felt like it was just, it kind of took, it just took a lot out of me, and I think I was just like burnt out at that point, and it was actually kind of a very dark like time in my life, even though I really appreciate all the like the opportunity and stuff, but it was hard, and like as you say, it just felt like really dehumanizing. I'm just like there, like just churning out pages and kind of, and not like talking to anyone, you know what I mean? Like I don't want to complain, but I just felt like I kind of wanted to get back to actually enjoying the process and like connecting with people and kind of being the creator that I want, instead of this person that was kind of like dissolving in the darkness.
right.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I totally understand this, because you do get into this zone of I love to make comics, but then once you do it, and so much is expected, or you are doing it so often, there's this thing that this just hit me this year, really. There's this period where you just start to exist in a vacuum, and it's like all I'm doing is, because like since I do like I'm doing the most right now, since I do it by myself, there's a lot of times where I am just at the desk by myself, like a crazy person, just like writing and like, haha, that's so funny, right? So it does take you need to, and a lot of cartoonists will say this, like, you need to be careful. You will start to exist in that vacuum. The thing is, and I know both of you are going to understand this when I say it, but there is so little understanding of what it takes to go into that page, like from the human aspect. Like, when I first started out, nobody knew around me what it meant to write a comic. Like, they thought, well, what do you mean? Like, you put what do you mean you're writing a comic? And it's like, well, that stuff, and then, drawing it just doesn't just appear. But these people, a lot of the people who don't understand that, they can't visualize it. And so that's where the element of more comes.
Yeah, as a scripter, I've had that so much. Like, they're like, what are you talking about? You're a writer and you have an artist. Like, do you do the bubbles? And I was like, well, there are some people that do the bubbles. I was like, but I actually have somebody else that does the bubbles. And they're like, well, what do you actually do? I was like, well, let me show you.
Well, it's tough
when I show them, they're like, wow, that's crazy.
Well, I said this before, like on Twitter, that because like Seth, I know like the work that you do, and you actually not a lot of people know this, but I'm just gonna go ahead and say it, that you do like the majority of like the promotion. Like, you manage the Instagram, you do like the Facebook, and whatever else. You're the one that's actually like doing the social media and the promotion stuff and telling people that we exist. And something that I also want to just kind of put out there is that I think writers have the most difficult job, because what you guys do is, a lot of it is invisible, and not just like in terms of the creative writing, because a lot of your writing actually and Jordan, you talked about this on the Canned Air podcast, where a lot of the writing that you guys do in terms of visualizing the scene and things like that actually doesn't make it into like the comic in its verbal form, right? That gets translated into pictures. And what you see in terms of your writing is like just 10% of what you actually wrote. And then there's like the writing that you have to do to make people care, right? That's like answering like DMs and like, things like that, and just kind of interacting with people, which is kind of a difficult task for someone who's kind of antisocial. But anyways, like like a lot of it, I think what you guys do is just like it's like invisible. Nobody gets it unless you kind of you're like, unless like you can kind of see it like from, I guess, an artist's perspective, like the actual work that you have to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I just, when I'm actually on social media promoting everything, I think we talked about this before we even started recording too. I do kind of cringe and about self-promoting sometimes, but I know I have to do it, so I do it anyway. And I've been actually doing better with that since what I do in my job kind of relates to it. So it's been, I've actually brought that in to actually my personal life and my comics life, and it's actually been helping me kind of get along with myself a little bit more about promoting. But it's just something that you have to do, and I think it's something that I'm getting better at over time. But you've helped out a lot too, Angela, because what you don't know is I know that you don't really run the social media accounts, but the ideas that you've incorporated that I've kind of ran with sometimes, it has been your idea. So sometimes I run out of ideas, and it's really good to have someone else there to kind of run ideas by you. And I don't think you realize how much you've actually incorporated to it as well. And that's kind of what I wanted to say. Also, I really, since I brought that up, I really wanted to go back to what I was talking with you, Jordan, about creating that extra persona, because everybody knows that, everybody that knows me, that follows me on multiple social media accounts, knows that I'm different on each one. And, I'm very different on Twitter. And I kind of feel like that is that is where I release my shadow. That's my darker side. And I feel like Facebook is kind of like my personal thing, where I'm just like, I'm my normal self around, like I would be around friends and family. Like, and then Instagram is kind of like all over the place. Like sometimes I post things that I write, and sometimes they're dark, sometimes they're lighthearted, and sometimes they're from Gale, and sometimes I post pictures of my regular life. So it's like Instagram is just, well, it's that ADHD thing that I was talking about. So, but yeah, I think that adopting the persona, to the alter ego to help you promote, I think I'm thinking about adopting that and actually running with it, like full force from now on.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea because it is hard to, as regular people, we have a block in our mind that doesn't let us get too promotional because we want to try and be humble about stuff. But the thing is, if you're spending so much time making something, you gotta get it out there. And as I was talking to you guys before, Stan Lee is the example I always go to because they called him back in the day. He was the Funky Flash Man because he was the mouth of Marvel. He would promote anything, And whenever I go and I'm in person, especially at conventions, I just put on this because I really don't like to interact with people a lot because you kind of like in your day job, right? You have to interact with people, and then you're like, okay, I want to shut that off. But then when you go out, and you're like, why are people going to care about my comic? You really have to kind of put on this persona and say like, well, you should care because I care, and I'm going to prove that I care by becoming you don't want to because I have heard horror stories. I don't think I've ever experienced this, but I've heard these stories of people who stand in the aisles and yell, come see my booth, and they block off traffic, and that you don't want to do.
That's going a little bit too far. That's a little too extroverted. I think you and I know, and Angela knows, we're all three introverts. And that's not, completely surprising coming from someone that's creating, that are coming from a creative, It's,
right.
Most of us are introverts. We like to go into ourselves. We like that alone time. And, that's where we get our energy. But what I've noticed is that as an introvert, you can act as an extrovert for a certain amount of time. You will start to feel anxious after long periods of exposure to people. But at the same time, it's like, sometimes you really do enjoy the connection with people, and that's what it's all about. But what you need to do is you need to go out and it can be learned because over the last year, I have learned this, and I can go out in public and I can speak to people, and I can do a lot of things that I didn't used to go out and do, and then I just come home and I'm just completely exhausted.
Yeah,
because I've actually been I don't think anyone is truly 100% an introvert. I think everybody has the potential to show, both sides. I think some of us are a little bit more introverted than others. But I think that we all have that part of us that can go out there and associate and actually do those things. And when we come back, that's when we re-energize it. If you're mostly an introvert, you come back and, you can settle down and do what it is that you need to do alone for the night. And then when you wake up in the morning, you're ready to go again. And I think that's important for your mental health and, and important to actually, stay going strong with what you have to do as far as promoting face to face.
Yeah, and I think, and I really like, Jordan, what you said about just kind of creating an alter ego to kind of, for a shameless promotion, because I think I think I was talking to this writer and he was telling me that, when the creative part, so the writing and the actual making of the comic, that's only 50% of the equation. The other part of the equation is actually getting your comic out there, getting people to care, and hopefully, support you, right? So that's so I think kind of creating this this other identity, if you will, that's kind of the opposite of, like, I guess, who you are. But still, I guess, like, yeah, I'm probably not going to stand on a soapbox and shout.
Right.
But maybe I can do a little bit more on social media.
Well, the thing is, you have to think is, like, when you're creating something, like when you're drawing or when you're writing, it already means something to you. So I think the importance is, if you're creating this persona, you're almost seeing it from the other person's point of view. Like, I already created this. I know it matters to me, but, like, how can somebody else see it so it matters?
Right. Yes, that is awesome. Because your story, and you do have to communicate your story. But to actually communicate someone else's story to someone else, sometimes and if you, like, think of it that way, it's like, if you adopt this other persona, it's like you're communicating your story through something that's not you. And it's like you're someone else telling someone else's story, and then because I think we tell a lot of I think we always tell other people's stories to other people, like, every day. And I don't know, I just feel like I feel like that's a cool way to go about it. I don't know.
It works too, because like, I don't know if you guys have ever tried to pitch your ideas to potential customers or whatever, and a lot of times what happens with me is I kind of go overboard. I tell them a little bit too much, too many details, and it's not necessarily the important stuff. So if you do it, and you're thinking from somebody else's viewpoint, like, what are X, Y, and Z that this person would want to hear? And so you kind of whittle it down. So it does help you with your sales pitch. Well, not necessarily just your sales pitch, but your pitch in general. Like, here's my comic. It's about this. Instead of being like, oh, and so, I was walking down the street and I saw this shade of blue and it reminded me of this thing. And, and so seeing it from somebody else's point of view is like, because, we're talking about culture that wants to go. Let's say you're at a convention and they're walking by. You've got 3 seconds, I guess, probably, to capture their attention.
Yeah, about 3 seconds.
Yeah. Wow. So Jordan, can you give us an example of a pitch? Because I think that's something I definitely struggle with Gale. Like, I don't know really how to summarize it, because, like, when I'm drawing, I'm just thinking about nuances and complexity, and sometimes I, like, vaguely know what's going on in, like, the further chapters, but I don't really know what it's really about and how to sell it. So maybe could you give me an example of maybe how you talk about comics, either online or at a con?
Sure. So the easiest one for me right now is because it's the one that I'm in the middle of. But usually I try to make it, because people will say, what is this about? And because it's a running, like, an ongoing gag thing, I'll basically just say it's about a duck trying to be human, and people are like, oh, okay. And because it is an introspective book and it's an existential book about, living in this human world, so that's all I tell them, and they're like, interesting, okay, because I think, one, they get caught off guard that it's about a duck. So I think that may be the only thing they need to hear, because sometimes I just say it's about a duck, and they go, all right, I'll look at it. For something like Water, I usually tell them, this is an autobiographical, comic, and it's a way that I process and deal with mental health, and that's another thing that people get into. So I basically just boil it down to the core essence of what it really is. Like, if you're going to even look at it for a second, or read one strip or one page, that's what I'm going to, so that's what it is.
Something like Water is real, though. Is like, I mean, every time that I read something from there, I'm like, that is real. I don't know. It's just you. It's almost like I can feel exactly what you're going through when you write it. And I hope that's, like, kind of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, that is exactly the goal, is to make people relate, and so that they feel like they can, also talk about their what's on their mind, or in a way, I was very young when I was a teenager when I was diagnosed with depression. So in a way, I was kind of lucky, because I didn't know about the stigma, really, because I was so young, I didn't process it. So I always grew up talking and being very honest about it. And so that's one thing that strip has benefited from, because basically, I mean, I don't think I've ever held anything back from that strip. And I think that's one thing that resonates with people, is just, oh man, I have felt that way. You said that. And I think that's how you feel comfortable saying that, but you said that,
Yeah. I mean, I think, I'm glad you were talking about depression, and how you've been vocal with it, because I'm sure that's what's helped you actually, get this far. And you actually seem, you can actually go on a podcast and seem absolutely normal, and like there's nothing wrong with you. But there's always, if you suffer from depression, there's always something. That anxiety is there's something there all the time, and people don't really actually understand that. I don't think. And but you cope with it in a certain way, and it kind of helps release that. A lot of people that don't suffer from depression, and I think we all suffer from depression, really. I think that's a load of crap. I think a lot of people actually suffer from it, some more than others, though. But I think resilience is something that we practice, and we practice it through art, and we practice it through our writing. And I think that's what I started at an early age, too. I wasn't very vocal about my depression when I was a kid. I started writing poetry, and, I think when I got married to my wife, she read some of my poetry, and she wondered why it was so dark. And it was like, because it was absolutely not like me to be so dark. And, I think I posted something on Facebook the other day that said something about it. But I just think that it's something that we use to kind of get to know ourselves a little bit better. And it kind of helps us be, more, kind of helps us to bounce back, and that's what I use it for. And I think that, something like water is exactly what I was trying to do, in my early, years of when I just started writing poetry. And that's actually what led me to writing short stories and the blogs that I wrote, and everything that I've ever done has been a way to actually cope with, the things that I just didn't feel like everybody else wanted to hear about. And then you write it out in a story, and then all of a sudden people are like, wow, this is cool. This is awesome. And it's like, if I would have just told you that, like, everything that this is all about, if I would have told you what inspired this, you would have probably just been bored out of your mind.
Right. Yeah.
Jordan, like how does it feel, like kind of putting all of yourself out there through like water? Because sometimes some of the when I kind of read water, like, and I think it's almost like I'm like kind of spying on you or something like that. Like it's so intimate sometimes, and it's just so like, is it now kind of like, okay, it's normal, and this is what not normal, I don't want to use that term, but like it's like kind of like, okay, this is my routine, I have to create this comic? Or do you still kind of get that, oh, maybe this is like too much to reveal?
Yeah, it's interesting, because sometimes I do feel, well, so the more serious, very personal ones, I never, when I'm putting them on paper, I always feel like at that moment that is exactly what I need to do to get better. It's a release valve almost. I know I have written, and like, I don't want to get like too serious or anything, but I have written on there before about losing people and suicide and suicidal thoughts. And when I wrote those, that was the last piece I needed to move on and to cope with those situations. So I never felt like, ooh, this is too much, because I was like, this is exactly what I need to feel okay again. But the funny thing I've always noticed is like, I'm completely okay with putting myself out there online. But then sometimes people will come up to me and be like, like if I write something kind of cryptic, like, about love, for example, or whatever, people will come up to me and be like, hey, who was that about? And I'm like, and I get really uncomfortable, because I almost think it's like my artistic license to be like cryptic, and like I don't have to explain myself.
Yeah, Bob Dylan said that, and I've been, putting that out for a long time. You don't have to explain yourself, man. You don't.
Yeah, so when I'm in person, it gets a little more uncomfortable, but like, it's funny because I know that like, dozens of people are going to read this online, and I'm like, yeah, no big deal. But then when somebody asks me like, because there have been several times that I've been at work and people will go, they'll come up to me and they'll go, "So, are you doing okay?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, I'm okay." Like, that's how I process my emotion. They're like, "Okay, I read your comic and I was just worried about you." And I'm like, "Oh my god, maybe I went too far this time."
Oh wow. And do you find that is it? Well, I guess like how do I phrase this? Do you find is it easier for you to kind of bury yourself in front of, I guess, just the internet, but like you don't really know who's out there? And do you find it maybe harder to kind of share this with your friends and family in some way?
Yeah, it's kind of like when you go to a therapist and you're like, I don't know this therapist very well, but I can tell them like all my secrets. But then like you're at Thanksgiving or whatever, and you're like, I'm not going to talk to these people about that. It is kind of like that, just because a lot of times it's an ephemeral thing that you need to get off your chest. It's like, I'm just going to put this out there so people know how I'm feeling. And then it's like, but I don't. But this is, like I said, like this is the final part. I don't need to necessarily dive into this because this is the therapy here. And so then doing it and just putting it out there for people to see that you don't necessarily know. And also the thing is, like, when you're putting it online, it's like, this may be my chance to spur somebody else to talk about this thing with their family or whatever. And then in person, it's more like people are just like, hey, like, explain this to me. So it's like, it doesn't have the same meaning, I think, in person, because there's this, online, there's this wall of distance, like, interpret this how you want. But in real life, people are like, hey, explain, I want the answers to this. And you're just like, oh man, like, I don't know, I just feel sad, and I have a watercolor in my hand, and so it is a different experience. And I think, oddly enough, I am more comfortable being, and maybe it's just like the facelessness, the keyboard, whatever they call that, where your distance between, whatever, I'm rambling now, but yeah, it is easier to do it online. And maybe that goes back to being introverted, because in person it's like, oh, I don't want to talk about this, but online it's like I'm a different person sometimes.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, and this is kind of just, it's not related, but kind of related, but Jordan, when I kind of read your comments on like Instagram, you have such a cheery persona. Like you're just like the most peppy and like cheerful, lovable person, and then you read like something like Water, and just like and just you go through like this kind of this vortex of like feeling and like negative emotions, and then you get this comment from Jordan that's just like so peppy, and it's always kind of motivating and encouraging, and it's like, I don't know, I think that's kind of funny to see.
But that's actually I think that's actually how it is. It's like you're not always like Eeyore, right?
Right.
Exactly. So it's like you're not always Eeyore. Like nobody can say, that's why people don't understand when you write certain things the way you do, because it's like, well, I don't see this person ever,
Right.
It's because we don't ever really show this person sometimes, and you don't see it unless you're like maybe someone that is very close to you, like maybe if it's my wife or something like that, like they might see something, a glint of it. But even then, you don't ever show 100% of exactly the way you feel. And that's why it's good to get it out through that kind of medium.
And absolutely. And I think on Instagram too, I think it's kind of become this platform where everyone is kind of, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but it's kind of known, it's a platform known for people that's just showing a highlight reel of their life. Like, oh, look at this, delicious food I'm eating. Look at me on vacation. And I think it's so important, Jordan, that like works like Water kind of reminds us that, it kind of reminds me that, okay, I'm okay because somebody else gets me, and I've gone through those kind of emotions at dark times too, and not just like seeing like all the fabulous stuff that people do in their life, which is just like a snapshot 1 minute in their day. So
no idea how many times I see that every day.
Yeah, it's really important to me, because I have, for the last like year or two, I've really got to notice what you're talking about exactly, is that we sort of curate our lives so that we see, and I think I may have even I might have done a Water about this, and I think I even did a Gordy about this, where we sort of curate all the best things. But I have always believed personally that, because like my social media accounts, I never like delete anything, so I have good and bad things from over the years. You know, like a lot of people, they'll go back and they'll delete like pictures with their ex-girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever. But I don't really believe in that, because I think that those are the things that have brought us to where we are now. So I think it's really important to have an accurate representation of what you're feeling. And so, yeah, like you're saying, I think it's dangerous, because you scroll through Instagram and, you know, you see all this perfect stuff, and then, you know, you never really know what the person is going through. And I think it's really important not to do that, but I think it's also really easy to do that.
I don't think the person that posts those pictures actually has a real representation of what they're going through, and something that they can look back on and remember. Because if you're just posting things that look perfect, and you know you're not going through a perfect time, and then you look back at that, I think that can be even more confusing versus you just looking at something plain and simple, and you're just real, and you're just like, I remember when I went through that time. You know, I don't know, maybe that's a weird thought, but
no, it's true, because when you say it like that, I think back, like when I look at some of my really darker comics, I look back at those and I think, well, wow, I went through that and I'm not there now. So, you know, there's a reminder, because you do have to remember the bad things that happened to you, just because they are part of you. And, you know, I can't ignore my mental health any more than my physical health or whatever. So I look back and I see that and I'm like, well, that did happen and I got through it and I'm not there now. So at least I have that, you know.
Oh, I think, were you trying to say something, Seth?
no, something happened over here on my end.
Oh,
okay.
My bad.
But I have a question for you guys. This is just kind of on the topic and kind of random, but like, have you guys like, so like, I guess all of us have kind of maybe been online, you know, I don't know. I guess, what am I trying to say? I guess what I'm trying to say is, have you guys ever went through a period where you were kind of being someone else online, and you couldn't really and or just being like a different person than who you truly are, and like have you either of you kind of gone through a period like that?
Well, I don't know, because I don't really know sometimes. I think everything that I do online is who I truly am. I just think it depends on kind of where I'm coming from at the time. You know, I'm all over the place. So if I'm doing something, it's because it's on my mind. It's because it's me. But then there are some times when I post things that I think, well, that was not me. So it's really weird, because I will post things, you know, that are just like, you know, spur of the moment, that are on my mind, and that those are me. I have to accept those as me, even if at the point in time I post it, you know, later on I think, well, that wasn't really me, you know. So I have to accept that too. So I don't think there's ever been a time when I've actually posted something or said something or been someone online that wasn't me.
Okay.
I mean, there have been times when I've posted things online that I regretted posting. But it just depends on the frame of mind that you're in at the time. I haven't done anything to like make my life seem like it's better than what it is. I think that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. Like, I don't think I've ever done that. And if I have, I don't remember.
Okay.
yeah, I think I've always been pretty, I think I've always tried to be pretty close to who I am. I will say that ever since I started doing the autobiographical Something Like Water, it has kept me a lot more in check in terms of being honest online. Not that I was like ever, out there fabricating stuff, but I wasn't as open and I wasn't as transparent. The last year and 3 or 4 months that I've been doing it, it's been very much. It's been a lot more of a dialogue about who I really am. And, and I think the other thing is you guys were talking earlier about, not necessarily being able to see that from my other, other interactions online. It's like, I think a lot of people just kind of assumed, because like, honestly, like one of the things that I hear so much is when I talk to people about mental health, they're like, wow, I never thought that you would be depressed because you're so jokey all the time. So, and I think that has maybe helped me stay true to myself, but I think it's also opened up a perception to others that it's like, oh, I do have to realize that like what this guy is putting out there is also peppered with this. So I think it's, helped me stay a little more accurate.
Do you think your jokes sometimes actually, your jokes in Gordy, sometimes I get a hint of, like something like water is like, it's kind of like obvious, it's apparent, but sometimes I think I get hints of that, that kind of stuff in Gordy too, Yeah.
I think that Gordy tends to be a little more existential, but I also think that those jokes come from a place of, because like for me, one of the biggest things about doing Gordy is making people laugh. And when because there's a lot of people who write comedy that are I would say that they're pretty depressed, and I think that that's one of their coping mechanisms, and it is for me. So I think you have to tinge your with me, I don't want it to just be like, oh, this is a strip, this is a panel, this is a panel, this is a joke. I want it to be tinged with real life, and sometimes those jokes have a hint of sadness, or because the older you get, the more you're able to see things. It's it's like the older you get, the more you're able to see there are funny things in the world, but inside of them there's a little bit of sadness, so I try to put that in there because I think that's a real feeling.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I actually think I'm going to go into a Gordy comic and just laugh, but sometimes I'm actually like, wow, that's real, and it being existential too. I mean, it's supposed to feel that way sometimes because that's what existential comics do. But there's also those topics, that of like, I do feel like there are some of those topics like of mental health that kind of reflect off of you. I kind of see you in each thing that you do, but and I don't know you. I'm not trying to assume that I know you, but I think that I feel like, what I've came to know of you. Like I could pick your comics out.
Oh,
something. I really could. I think I could. And you know what? We could do a test like this on one of our podcasts one day. It's like
we could do like when they do the blindfold taste test.
I don't think that I would be able to read a comic blindfolded, but
well, you will puree the comic and you can drink it. I do think I really appreciate what you're saying though, because like so often when people ask me like, what is the approach? I always say that part of you, if not a large part of you, has to go into your work, or else is it going to feel the same? And, when you look at Gordy, for example, pretty much every main character in Gordy has some part of me, because Gordy himself is this sort of like, the older you get, the more like you kind of wish you could be still that young, sort of naive, because Gordy is very naive and excited, and I kind of have that, but I also can think back to when I was a kid and had that so much and miss it. And then, his roommate is sort of the more cynical, modern person that, lives in society and understands, and understands that like almost everything's a scheme, and, then you have Otto, who's this huge nerd. And so I think you put yourself in there and people are going to, not only are they going to see that you are in there, but I feel like a lot of people are going to be able to see themselves in there. Because if you're genuine to who you are in your writing and your drawing, then people are going to be able to relate.
Yes. And I also think that that Gordy, if people were actually trying to be human as much as Gordy's trying to be human, I think we'd have a better world out there.
And that is my goal with Gordy, is to point out that like, hey man, just like be cool, be like this duck. What does it mean to be human? It means being a duck.
Yeah, there you go.
That's awesome.
There,
I
you
would
talk
love
about
to quote that.
it's
When we're promoting this podcast, I would love to quote that. What does it mean to be human? It means being a duck.
And that's how we came up with the title for this week's episode, Being Human is to be a Duck. We really hope you enjoyed listening to part one. Unfortunately, there are parts where the mics kept cutting on and off, and I think this might have to do with Hangouts and the internet connection. So apologies for that, and we'll definitely look into better setups for future episodes. Luckily, in my kind of thoughts, the recording did capture the important points around promoting yourself as an introvert, mental health, and being yourself online. So we really hope that you'll join us again next week for the second part of the episode, where we delve even deeper into creating comics, characters, and the writing and drawing process. Thanks so much for watching. And if you like today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And we really hope to see you next time.